Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be doing a few track reviews. I know typically on my channel when I've done track reviews in the past, it's typically been one track per video, sometimes two if maybe an artist decided to drop two singles at once or something like that. I've never done something like this before where I've covered multiple tracks in the same video by different artists. However, I'm thinking that this year I'm going to start doing this a bit more, hopefully. I know last year I didn't do a whole ton of track reviews, mostly because, trying to make a video just about one track is something that oftentimes I'm not really all that interested in doing if it's just one song, when I could just focus on my time on making more album reviews or other things like that. Though I'm hoping that if I do more videos like this where I combine more tracks into one video, maybe I'll get more track reviews out there and I'll be able to cover more tracks that are released as singles as a result of this. So yeah, I'm not saying I won't do an individual track review for an individual song if I feel compelled to at some point in the future, but this might be how I'm going to be doing the majority of track reviews from here on out. And once again, there's no set in stone schedule for track reviews or anything like that. They'll just kind of be coming whenever I get around to it. But today we're going to be talking about 3 new tracks that I recently heard and wanted to talk about. So let's get started with the first of those. The first track we're going to be talking about here today is this collaborative track between Gesaffelstein and The Weeknd titled Lost in the Fire. This was a track that I was mostly interested in checking out for The Weeknd. I'm not as familiar with Gesaffelstein and his work, but I figured that this track would be at least worth checking out. And overall, I think that this is a pretty mediocre track at the end of the day. It's not a terrible song, but at the same time, it's not one that really blew me away. The Weeknd's performance here on this track is one that's pretty average by his own standards. His singing sounds pretty fine on this thing, but he's a pretty great singer all around, so just hearing him be pretty okay on this track isn't really all that standout, even if his just okay is probably better than most singers at their best, I guess you could say. Still doesn't really stand out to me all that much here on this song. The lyrics are just kind of typical Weeknd relationship themed lyrics. They're not really all that interesting. I've heard tons of these lyrics before from The Weeknd, and these don't particularly stand out to me in any way that's all that exciting or interesting. The production here on this track is pretty okay. It's probably one of the stronger points of this track overall outside of the vocals, but still, it's not something that's good in a way where it's really standout. It's more good in a way where it's just like the best part of this otherwise really mediocre track. It's not a really catchy song either, I feel. I feel like this track was maybe just the slightest bit catchier, that it would have a bit more to it for me to really come back to and want to revisit, but overall, it's a song that, when I listen to it, it's not particularly terrible or anything. It's not a painful listen or anything like that by any means, but it's a song that I really don't focus on all that much after giving it several listens. Of course, on those first few listens, I was paying a lot more attention to it to kind of pick everything apart, but after that, this song just started to really fade into the background every time I would put it on, because there's just very little that jumps out to me as being super interesting. So yeah, I thought this track was pretty mediocre at the end of the day. I'd recommend it mostly to people who are fans of these two artists that are collaborating here on this track. If you happen to like any of their work, I'm guessing you'll like this to some extent, but yeah, this one wasn't really for me, I guess. The next track we're going to be talking about is a new track from the Maine titled Numb Without You. Now, I believe this track is going to be the lead single from their upcoming album that should be coming out later this year. An album that I'm definitely looking forward to and excited to see what they're going to do, especially after hearing this new song here from them, considering I enjoy this song a fair bit. Now, when it comes to the Maine, I really like their 2015 album, American Candy, one of my favorites of that year. However, I was pretty disappointed with the last album they dropped in 2017, Lovely Little Lonely. I thought it was an album that, while more mature than American Candy and a bit darker at times as well, I mean, as dark as you're really going to get with the sound that the Maine have going for them, it was an album that just felt a bit more boring overall, I guess. There's very little on that project that stood out to me, and even the tracks that stood out to me on my listens of that album don't really pull me back to that album, or just themselves as individual tracks like the best of American Candy did. But this track here is one that I could see myself coming back to, and if this is what the rest of this album's going to be like, that they're going to be releasing later this year, I'm really excited to see what they do, because I like how this track takes the more mature, darker sound that Lovely Little Lonely had going for it, but also sounds just a lot more interesting. I love the fact that they're able to incorporate some strings here onto this track. It creates a very interesting instrumental here for this song, but at the same time, this track is still, at the end of the day, a more straightforward pop rock song. And by that I mean that it's incredibly catchy overall. I'm hoping that the rest of this album that I'm going to be releasing is going to maybe follow suit with that very catchy pop rock sound, but maybe have some of those more mature and dark elements from Lovely Little Lonely. I think that would be a great thing to do. And I just really like how this track has that very catchy appeal that I really loved about American Candy, but mixes in some more interesting instrumental elements that I really enjoy. This isn't a perfect track, though. There are some elements on it that I don't particularly care for. For one thing, the vocal manipulations that are going on the bridge, I just don't really feel like have any purpose there. Like, I feel like it would have been fine without them, and they're just kind of distracting in a way that's not particularly good. They don't add to the track in a way. They're just kind of there, I guess. And the lyrics on this track, while not bad, aren't super interesting, I guess. I mean, they're serviceable for sure, and given how catchy this track is and how fun and interesting the instrumental is as well, it's not super important that the lyrics on this thing need to be, fantastic or world-changing or anything, but they're just kind of okay at the end of the day. If the rest of the track wasn't as enjoyable as it was, the lyrics would definitely be a bigger problem, but yeah. This track does have some minor problems with it, but I think it's a pretty solid single from this upcoming album of theirs, and I'm really excited to hear what it's going to deliver when it finally drops, even if I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of their last project. So yeah, check this out if you're a fan of the Maine, check this out if you like pop rock, because this is a pretty solid track overall. And next up, the final track we're going to be talking about here today is this new track from The Killers titled Land of the Free. Now, I wasn't really too sure what to expect from this track. I'm not sure if this is going to be part of an upcoming album from the group, or if it's just like a one-off single that they made. I think it might be more of a one-off single given what the track is about. It's this very politically charged track, so maybe it was just a one-off single that they decided to drop as opposed to something that's going to be part of a greater project. And overall, this is a track that was kind of a miss for me overall, even though I'm a Killers fan overall. While I like the message of the lyrics here in the song, while I definitely feel like the Killers on this track definitely are on the right side of history, if you will, I just really feel like the very overly political lyrics here that don't really go into a whole ton of detail just makes this track really uninteresting at the end of the day, especially given that the instrumental paired up with this thing isn't particularly interesting either. Like I said, I like the message of the lyrics here, but like so many artists out there nowadays that are trying to make political songs or albums or what have you, just because it's a really hot topic right now, I feel like lots of these artists are going into it just putting the most surface level amount of effort into it, really. They don't really have an interesting take on current issues or anything. They don't really have a deep understanding of it at times, it seems, as well. They're just kind of throwing out buzzwords or just tackling the most surface level issues and hoping that people like it just because it matches up with what they like as well. And while I do, like I said, like the lyrics here on, well, not necessarily like the lyrics on this track, I agree with the message of the lyrics here on this track, I just feel like this track falls perfectly into that category of some pieces of music released nowadays that just have a really overly political feel, but very little actual substance to it. They don't really say anything new or interesting here on this track. They're mostly just going on with some very surface level observations that anyone could really tell you. Talking about gun violence in America. It's not really all that profound at this point. The mention that that's a problem at this point, it's pretty common knowledge out there. Things like the border wall, that's not anything profound either. People are talking about it. It's the big thing right now. It's not particularly interesting just because you put it in a song. So yeah, overall, the lyrics on this track aren't particularly interesting. I just feel like there's a lot of other artists out there that are making politically charged music that's a lot more interesting, a lot more in-depth, if you will, has a lot more interesting of a perspective on it as well. I just kind of feel like the Killers here are just taking really basic lyrics and just trying to make an anthem out of it. It doesn't really work. The instrumental here of this track is this more slow piano ballad type instrumental. It does have a bit of a swell in it later on in the track as it tries to build up some tension. However, by this point, the instrumental has just kind of lost me when combined with the lyrics. It's not super interesting, and even the swell in emotions that comes later on in the track isn't one that's particularly interesting. Overall, the instrumental on this track is just really boring overall, I guess you could say. I mean, it's performed adequately enough, and the same thing goes for the vocals here on this track. They're performed nicely enough. In fact, I'd say the vocal performance on this track is probably the strongest aspect of it. But overall, the decent performances on this thing aren't enough to really save the kind of uninteresting track that this ends up being. Like I said, like the overall message of the track, but there's so many other artists out there right now that are doing the same general message, but taking very interesting perspectives on it, just telling more interesting stories with it, bringing more to the table, if you will. This just feels very surface level, it just feels very cookie cutter, and it's not really interesting at the end of the day. Like I said, I feel like this track tries to be an anthem, but just kind of falls flat on its face, because there's not a whole lot to it that's all that interesting. Overall, I'd only recommend this track to Killers fans. I'm guessing you're going to check it out anyway if you are a fan of this group, but I'm just hoping that this track isn't a part of some upcoming album from them or anything like that, because I really didn't care for this one all too much. Probably my least favorite track out of the ones I'm covering here today. So yeah, overall, this was all the thoughts I had on these tracks that I covered here today. If I had to recommend one of these tracks to you the most, it would be the main track. If I had to not recommend one of these the most to you, it would be the one that we just talked about, as I was just explaining. Overall, an adequate collection of tracks, if you will. We had one song here that I liked, one that I thought was average, one that I didn't really care for all that much. But, yeah, just my own personal opinions. If you happen to disagree with any of my opinions on any of these 3 tracks, that's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave your own opinions on either of these 3 tracks or multiples of these 3 tracks in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. Thank you guys for watching once again, and stay golden.